The wind over the wall had changed. Jon Snow stood atop the icy ramparts of Castle Black, his breath curling into the night air, his fingers wrapped tight around the hilt of his sword. The third horn blast still echoed in his ears, like thunder, rolling from another world. Once he had only read of it 3 blasts meant the others, the White Walkers, the ancient enemy. Now he had seen them. They marched not in silence, but with the creaking of dead limbs and the crackle of unnatural. Cold, eyes blue as glaciers, shadows in armor. Behind them, whites by the thousands clawing and shrieking, undead men and beasts twisted by ice and death. The wall had held them off for now. But Jon knew the truth. This was no longer a northern myth. The long night had begun in the south. No one believed it. Letters were dismissed as desperation or northern trickery. Lords debated inheritance and titles, while snow began to fall in places it hadn't in years. But Eddard Stark stood in the throne room of the Red Keep and said the words aloud. The White Walkers are real. The dead march. If we do not unite, all our banners will burn together. Tywin Lannister, face lined with both age and suspicion, did not laugh. He waved away his bannermen and sat alone with Ned, 2 old lions of different coats now forced to reckon with the truth. You ask them to forget blood feuds, Tywin said. You ask me to abandon legacy and vengeance. I ask you to survive, Ned replied. That night, Tywin summoned Varys, then sent ravens to every corner of the realm. For the first time, the lion roared not for gold, but for survival. The small council split. Cersei resisted. She believed the North was exaggerating, but Margaery Tyrell, now queen, was no fool. She persuaded her grandmother to listen. The Reach began to prepare. Grain was stored. Scouts were sent. Lord Randall Tarley marched north with 10,000 spears, not to take Winterfell, but to join it. And in the Riverlands, Robb Stark met with Davos Seaworth under the banner of truce. Davos, now Stannis' voice after the Blackwater, spoke plainly. My king still believes he is rightful heir. But even he sees now crowns don't matter when the dead don't kneel. Robb agreed to a temporary pact. The wolves and the stags would fight side by side. News of this alliance shocked the realm. Even the Vale, silent for so long under Lysa Arryn's grief, stirred. Petyr Baelish, ever the opportunist, saw a greater prize in unity than chaos. He convinced Lysa to send 1,000 knights through the Bloody Gate. He whispered to Sansa that her name could one day rule the North and perhaps more. The kingdoms, so long torn apart, were beginning to bend toward each other. Not by peace but by fear. And across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen made her final choice. The fleet was ready. The dragons were strong. The Unsullied drilled in perfect silence. She stood aboard the lead ship as it pulled from Myriene's harbor, the waves crashing like applause. Against the hull. She did not come for conquest. She came for fire and frost. The Targaryen banner flew once more red and black, and its shadow stretched toward Westeros. Jon Snow's next letter reached Ned just as the first snow touched the Riverlands. The wall will not hold. Not alone. Ned read it beneath the heart tree, alone, just as he had stood there years ago when Robert's letter first came. Then he had refused to ride south. Now he knew he would ride north. He summoned what allies remained. Lords from the Vale, Southern, bannermen, even old Lord Manderley from White Harbor. They would not wait for another war of succession. They would ride to defend the wall. And beside them rode Tywin Lannister. He wore no crown. He carried no banners. Only a sword and a look that had stared death in the face once before. Robb marched from Harrenhal, Stannis from Dragonstone. The Night's Watch prepared the defenses. Jon Snow stood at the gates of Castle Black, watching the horizon, and Daenerys crossed the sea, The Great War had begun not for the throne, but for the world. In the end, Ned Stark's refusal to become Hand had changed everything. The South never claimed his head. The North never lost its strength. The Game of Thrones had paused because death had come to end it. The cold came first. It seeped into the stones of Castle Black, wrapped itself around swords and cloaks, and gnawed at the bones of men. Fires burned brighter. Walls were reinforced with dragonglass. Every man, no matter his house or title, stood shoulder to shoulder on the battlements. Lords who had once plotted each other's ruin now shared soup in the same halls. Rivals who would have drawn blades over bloodlines now passed each other. Swords. The Wall had never seen such unity. From the east, Daenerys arrived. Her fleet had landed at Eastwatch by the sea. The dragons soared overhead, larger than anything Westeros had known in centuries. Their wings cast long shadows over the snow-covered earth as the queen rode north. The people knelt in awe. Jon Snow stood to greet her, a bastard no longer, but a leader in the truest sense. Beside him, Eddard Stark waited, his old eyes finding the ghost of Rhaegar in the curve of Daenerys' face. He did not bend the knee, but he offered his sword. "You come not to conquer," Ned said. "Then we stand as one." Daenerys nodded. "Fire will fight with ice." The great host gathered at the wall. From the south rode Robb, at the head of his bannermen, his direwolf Grey Wind at his side. Stannis marched with discipline, his remaining. Knights hard as stone. Tywin Lannister, mounted in red and gold, remained silent, eyes always watching. The Tyrells brought grain and healers. The erring banners flew high above their falcons. Even the Martells had sent a small contingent, spurred not by alliance, but by the knowledge that if the North fell, the South would follow. And then they came. The sky darkened. The snow fell sideways in unnatural wind. The horn sounded 3 times again. From the forest beyond the wall came the dead, whites by the thousands, creatures twisted and eyeless, women, children, warriors, horses all bound by death. And behind them, mounted on skeletal steeds, rode the White Walkers. They did not shout. They did not rush. They simply advanced. The battle began before dawn. The dragons fought first. Fire turned snow to steam. Whites melted in waves. But the Night King waited, his spear raised. When he threw it, one dragon screamed, struck down, its body crashing into the frozen forest. Daenerys cried out, grief tearing through her, but she did not stop. Men fought with dragonglass and steel. Jon Snow and his brothers of the Night's Watch led charge after charge. Gendry swung a hammer beside Robb Stark's blade. Arya emerged from the shadows, blade in hand, slaying whites like a wraith. Samwell Tarly stood over fallen brothers, defending them with trembling hands. And in the heart of the chaos, Ned Stark stood again on a battlefield, older, slower, but unbroken. He fought beside Jon. He called out commands to knights who once bowed to other kings. He drove his sword through death again and again, until the blade was slick and his arm numb. And when he saw the Night King walking toward the wall itself, he knew what had to be done. Jon and Daenerys rode toward him, man and dragon fire and blood. The final confrontation began not with a charge, but with a single blade, Valyrian steel. Jon met the Night King at the base of the wall. Their blades clashed, ice and fire colliding. The air screamed around them. But it was not Jon alone. Daenerys unleashed her dragon's fire. Arya struck from the shadows. Robb, injured, refused to. Fall back. And then Ned Stark stepped forward. He had carried the sword of House Stark for decades. He had taught his sons to live with honor. He had tried to protect the realm through peace, but now he protected it with fire. He thrust the blade through the Night King's chest, Valyrian steel, and northern fury behind it. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The Night King's shattered dot, the dead, froze in place, then collapsed, like puppets cut from strings. A silence swept over the battlefield dot, and then a roar not of terror, but of triumph. The dead were defeated. The wall still stood, and so did House Stark dot in the aftermath. There were no crowns raised in haste. The lords met not in pride, but in respect. Daenerys chose not to claim the Iron Throne. She saw a realm she did not need to rule, but could protect. Jon Snow, though born of ice and fire, refused to rule. He returned to the Wall, to rebuild, to watch, to remember. Robb Stark returned to Winterfell not as a king, but as Warden of the North, a title earned in battle and in unity. Ned Stark, older now, broken in some ways, but alive stood once. Again among his children, Arya, Sansa, Bran, who had returned from beyond the Wall, changed in ways few understood. There was peace, not perfect, not eternal, but peace nonetheless. The Game of Thrones was not won, it was ended, by the man who had once refused to play. The clash between the Baratheon brothers erupted beneath the moonlight outside Storm's End. Stannis, grim and resolute, arrived with siege towers and ships, his standard fiery heart blazing, rising high above disciplined ranks. Renly, vibrant and laughing still, had gathered half the Reach. His banners spread like spring fields, bright with Tyrell roses and Baratheon stags. Their camps were separated by tents, silence, and pride. But the battle never came, in the dead of night. Renly, Baratheon, died. His guards found no sign of an assassin, only his body-cold mouth open in surprise. Whispers spread quickly. Some said it was poison. Others claimed it was a shadow. Only Ser Loras wept without words. Only Brienne of Tarth screamed, covered in blood, as if her very soul had been split in two. She was accused, then released. Her innocence was clear, but the truth of what killed Renly remained locked in fire and fear. Stannis took what he needed, half of Renly's bannermen, his fleet, and the shattered loyalty of the Reach. The Tyrells, stung and suspicious, did not join him. Instead, they turned their eyes elsewhere. King's Landing. Tywin Lannister saw opportunity and struck a deal. Lady Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, sharp as ever, arranged the match. Margaery Tyrell would wed King Joffrey. A queen for a king, a rose for a lion. In exchange, the Tyrell army would ride for the capital, as Stannis prepared to lay siege to King's Landing. The city held its breath, but Robb Stark remained unmoved by southern treachery. His war was not with the Baratheons. His concern remained with Jaime's imprisonment, with the Lannisters' Reach, and with the safety of the Riverlands. Yet now that Tywin had left Harrenhal to defend the capital, Robb saw opportunity. He sent men to raid Lannister supply lines, burning their storehouses, freeing captive smallfolk. Each victory won him more than land, it won him loyalty. The Riverlands bled, but they bled under northern manners. Then came the battle that reshaped the war. Blackwater, Stannis' fleet, larger and more prepared, sailed up the bay with fury. But wildfire waited. Tyrion Lannister, playing the hand in Tywin's absence, set a trap. The green fire erupted, drowning thousands. The Blackwater turned to flame. Stannis' men screamed, burned, or drowned. Yet he pushed on, storming the gates with iron and rage. He nearly succeeded. But then the gates burst open, and the Tyrell army arrived, riding with Tywin Lannister at their front. Stannis was forced to retreat, his army shattered, his claims still alive, but bleeding. He returned to Dragonstone with Melisandre's whispers in his ears and fewer men at his back. Joffrey remained king. Margaery was betrothed. The people of the city, though half-starved, hailed the victory. The Lannisters had won the day, but the cost was high. Thousands dead, fear renewed, and whispers growing louder still. From the east came tales of dragons. Daenerys Targaryen had taken a Staper, then young Kai. She marched with unsullied, with freed slaves, with justice burning in her eyes. She had not forgotten Ned Stark's letter, though she still questioned its intent. Why would a Stark warn a Targaryen? Why not betray her, like his ancestors once did? Still, she kept his words. She knew he lived. She also knew Westeros remained blind to her return. They mocked her, called her a child, a widow, a dream. But she had dragons, and she had time got in the north. Time was growing short. The Night's Watch had ventured beyond the wall. Jon Snow, in deep cover with the wildlings, began to understand that the threat wasn't just Mance Rayder, it was the others. He had seen one, eyes blue as frozen death, and it had seen him. He sent word to Ned through secret channels. They are real. Ned gathered his most trusted bannermen. He showed them obsidian. He spoke of old legends. And when they laughed, he showed them Jon's letter. They come with the snow, he said, and the snows are falling early. He sent riders to the Vale, to the Riverlands, even a raven to Dorne. Forget your crowns. We have a greater enemy, but the lords of Westeros were deaf with ambition. Crowns glittered louder than warnings. Only one answer came, from Daerys. It was not a promise of alliance. It was not a threat. It was one sentence, scrawled in Valyrian and translated in careful ink. When I come, I will not burn the north. Ned held the letter for a long time. Beyond the wall, darkness gathered. And in King's Landing, a golden wedding approached Joffrey and Margaery. The Game of Thrones played on, but winter was already here. The bells rang in King's Landing, echoing across the city in celebration. The marriage of King Joffrey Baratheon and Lady Margaery Tyrell was not just a union of house and rose. It was a performance. Gold cloaks lined the streets. The nobles feasted for days. Singers praised the boy. King's victory at Blackwater, though it had been his grandfather who truly saved the city. And Margaery, ever the graceful rose, charmed the people with smiles and soft words. The capital danced, but under the shadow of fear, Joffrey had grown crueler, more erratic. He took pleasure in public beatings. He laughed when prisoners begged. Even Cersei began to sense something deeper was unraveling in her son. Yet none dared speak it aloud. Power rested with the lion's paw, and Tywin's grip had not weakened. But then, during the wedding feast, Dash poisoned. The goblet tipped. The boy. King choked. Blood poured from his nose. His skin turned the color of ash. Screams tore through the hall, and within moments, the king lay dead atop the golden table. Margaery wept. Cersei shrieked. Tyrion stood frozen, goblet still in his hand. He was arrested. Before the feast even ended, the capital spun into chaos. Cersei accused her brother without proof. Tywin, though shaken by the loss of his grandson, saw the moment as a test of control. He ordered a trial, confident that justice, or at least Lannister justice, would prevail. But the court was no longer fully under his thumb. Margaery remained in the Red Keep. Lady Olenna whispered with Varys. The Tyrells had lost a crownbud, not ambition. And not all in the capital mourned the cruel boy's death. Tyrion's trial began soon after. Without Ned Stark in the capital, there was no quiet opposition to injustice, no voice to steady the tide. Tyrion's enemies were many, and his allies few. Sansa Stark had fled the capital on the day of the wedding. Some said she was guilty. Others whispered that Petyr Baelish had spirited her away. And indeed, he had. Littlefinger took her to the Vale, placing her in Lysa Arryn's clutches, playing a longer game. He whispered that the world was changing, and that the North needed a queen, not just a name. Back in Winterfell, Ned received the news of Joffrey's death with grim silence. He gathered his council. A king dead, a trial looming, Sansa missing, the Lannisters divided. The time is now. But he did not march. Not yet. Instead, he sent word to Robb, now hardened by war and tempered by loss, had taken Harrenhal after Tywin's retreat. He held it as a symbol, though the castle was cursed. He knew the Lannisters were reeling. He knew the South was wounded. But like his father, he knew the greater danger was yet to come. Jon Snow's latest letter confirmed it. The White Walkers had attacked the scouting party. Half the men had vanished, the rest returned broken, half mad. The walls stood still, but the cold was spreading. Ned decided it was time. He wrote to the lords, declarant of the Vale. He wrote to Dorne. He wrote to the Reach. We have all lost sons. We have all buried brothers. But what marches from beyond the wall will not care for names or houses. If we are not united, we will not survive. And then he did what no man expected. He rode south. Not as a general, not with an army. He rode alone. To King's Landing. He came with no banners, no threat, only the weight of his name and the memory of what he once was. When he arrived, the court froze. Cersei refused to see him. Tywin received him in the Tower of the Hand. You come now? The old lion growled. After everything? I come because I see what you will not, Ned answered. The realm is bleeding, and the true war has not yet begun. Tywin stared at him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he listened. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen prepared her fleet. Her dragons had grown larger, fiercer. She stood upon the walls of Meereen and stared westward, toward the home she had never seen. Her words to her council were clear. Westeros is weak, but I will not come to rule its ashes. I will come when the realm cries out not for a conqueror, but for salvation. And soon it would, because from beyond the wall, the horn had been blown 3 times. The raven arrived in the early hours of the morning, black wings slicing through the gray. The wind howled outside Winterfell as Ned Stark stood beside the fire in his solar, Stannis Baratheon's raven in hand. The question was direct, without flattery or ceremony. Did you know the truth of Joffrey's blood? The implication struck harder than the words. Stannis suspected what Jon Arryn had suspected, what Ned himself now believed. The boy on the throne was no true Baratheon, but proof was elusive. Ned had not gone south. He had not examined the lineages or visited the smith's apprentices with black hair and Baratheon eyes. He had not spoken with Cersei. He had not seen the tears in her eyes or heard her bitter confession. And yet, deep down, he knew. Jon Arryn had died for that secret. Now the realm would burn for it. He wrote back to Stannis with caution. I have reason to believe the line is false, but we must act wisely, not hastily. The realm cannot suffer chaos without end. He sealed it with his direwolf sigil, knowing the time for silence had passed. But war had no patience for careful men. In King's Landing, Joffrey's coronation became a display of unchecked power. Heads rolled any lord who whispered of Stannis's claim was executed or imprisoned. Grand Maester Pycelle bowed low, whispering that the gods had blessed the boy king. Tywin Lannister ruled the realm in practice, and Cersei whispered into her son's ear, like a viper guiding its host. Renly Baratheon, in the Reach, declared himself king with the support of House Tyrell. His banners were green and gold, and his court was filled with music, feasts, and promises. He claimed the throne not by birth, but by love. The people will follow me, he said. Not Stannis. Not a child tyrant. The Baratheon brothers were at odds. The realm fractured into 3 kings. And in the north, the young wolf stirred. Robb Stark, now 17, saw the fires rising. He heard of bannermen imprisoned in the south, of ravens intercepted and tortured. Lord Rickard Karstark urged war. Great John Umber slammed his fist on the table. If the lion cub wears the crown, it's time we reminded the realm of northern teeth. Ned remained calm, even as his council burned with war fever. We will not march south for pride, he said. We will march if justice demands it. But then came the final blow, a raven from the twins. Catelyn's father, Hoster Tully, had died. His funeral rites would be held in River Run. A second raven arrived moments later. Lannister forces had crossed into the Riverlands. Edmure Tully was under siege. Catelyn's home was under attack. That night, Ned Stark made his decision. He called his bannermen. Horns echoed through the halls. Oaf Winterfell. The northern banners were raised, not for conquest, not yet for kingship, but for justice. Robb would ride south with 20,000 men. Ned would remain in the north, guarding the wall, preparing the realm for what was coming. The threat from beyond, the white shadows he had long feared, still stirred, even as men played their game of thrones. But Ned did not remain idle. He sent ravens to the Night's Watch, warning them to prepare. He commissioned blacksmiths to begin forging obsidian-tipped arrows. He wrote to Maester Aemon at Castle Black, asking if the tales of the Long Night were true. Meanwhile, Robb Stark crossed the neck. He met with the Freys at the Twins this time, with Catelyn by his side, and a full understanding of Walder Frey's pride. No marriage promises were made, no oaths carelessly offered. Robb promised gold, honors, hostages for trust. He passed through without the shadow of betrayal. At the Trident, Robb faced Jaime Lannister's vanguard. The battle was brutal, but decisive. Jaime, overconfident, underestimated the northern wolves. He was captured not by trickery, but by steel. The realm shook at the news. The Kingslayer is in chains. Back in the Red Keep. Joffrey screamed. Cersei slapped her guards. Tywin clenched his jaw. And Tyrion, who had only just returned from the Vale, began to understand that Robb Stark was not a boy, but a storm coming south. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen watched the smoke rise from her dragon's nostrils and thought of the raven she'd once received from a man named Stark. She kept it in her tent, rereading it in quiet moments. She wondered, will Westeros burn before I even set foot on its shores? The pieces were moving. The game had changed. Ned Stark's refusal had delayed the war, but not prevented it. Yet his presence in the north, alive and honorable, had changed its shape entirely. No execution, no Red Keep betrayal, no Stark heads on spikes, but still, the realm bled, and winter had not even begun. Robb Stark's victory at the Trident sent ripples through the 7 kingdoms. The capture of Jaime Lannister was more than a tactical win, it was a symbol. The Kingslayer, golden and proud, now bound in chains, was marched through the Riverlands under Northern Guard. The sight stirred old loyalties. House Tully stood, tall once again. River Run was secured. Edmure swore vengeance. The River Lords rallied. Robb Stark had become not just a commander, but a contender. Yet he did not crown himself king. When his bannermen called for it, Robb refused. There are too many kings already, he said. He would not split the realm further. His cause was justice, not ambition. The North had not forgotten the Mad King's flames, or Robert's rebellion. They did not seek thrones, they sought safety, honor, and the right to govern themselves without southern deceit. In the south, Tywin Lannister raged, his son imprisoned, his armies scattered, and his grip on the throne growing thinner. He sent ravens to Dorne, to the Vale, to any house willing to oppose the Starks. But alliances were harder to forge now. The Lannisters had grown too powerful, too arrogant. Many lords now saw Robb as a rightful protector, even if he bore no crown. And in King's Landing, the mood turned darker still. Joffrey's rule, untempered by Ned's steady hand, had grown crueler by the day. Small folk were whipped for speaking of the wolf in the south. Gold cloaks patrolled the streets like wolves themselves, dragging dissenters to the dungeons. The High Septon, once silent, now murmured about sin and false kings. The faith stirred uneasily. Cersei clutched the throne with venomous desperation, but the realm slipped through her fingers. Then came news that changed everything. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself king and was marching with a fleet from Dragonstone. Unlike Renly, Stannis brought discipline and fire. Melisandre, the Red Priestess, walked by his side. Men whispered of her power, of shadow assassins and fires that spoke. The lords of the Stormlands were divided. Some rallied behind Renly's charm. Others bent the knee to Stannis' claim. And through it all, House Baratheon fractured further. Robb watched from the Riverlands, choosing neither brother. His war was with the Lannisters, not the Baratheons. His mother, however, urged him to consider diplomacy. If Stannis wins, she said, he will not forget that you remain neutral. If Renly wins, he may remember that you never supported him either. But Robb remained firm. I won't gamble the North's future on southern crowns. Far away, in the Vale, Lysa Arryn watched the realm burn and locked herself tighter within the Aerys walls. She sent no aid. The Vale remained cold and silent, untouched by Wardot, and in the north, Ned Stark prepared. He kept Winterfell strong. He trained with the guard. He met with the Night's Watch and sent obsidian weapons to the wall. From Castle Black came grim tidings. Rangers had vanished. Ghostly sightings, a darkness gathering beyond the Frostfangs. Jon Snow, now a brother of the Watch, rode often. His letters spoke of strange winds, of Craster's Keep, and of a rising fear even the wildlings could not name. Ned wrote back, urging Jon to remain vigilant. What comes from the north may not wear a crown, he warned, but it may bring the end of all crowns. Even as men fought and bled for thrones, Ned Stark feared a far older war, approaching a war beyond politics, beyond bloodlines. Then from the east, another fire was lit. Daenerys Targaryen, now mother of dragons, had begun her conquest of the Chong, cities of Slaver's Bay. Her name grew louder, whispered in ports and sung in shadows. Merchants brought stories of fire-breathing beasts and a silver-haired queen who freed the chained. Westeros listened. The Iron Throne dismissed it, but Ned Stark remembered the stories of old Valyria. He remembered Rhaegar. He remembered what dragons once were and what they could become again. He sat alone one night beneath the heart tree, the snow beginning to fall. Is this what you would have wanted, Benjen? He whispered to the cold. Is this the world we fought to save? The wind gave no answer, but far to the south, war drums beat louder. Stannis had landed at Storm's End, Renly prepared for battle. And in the Riverlands, Robb Stark sent out riders not to make war, but to seek truth. He needed to know where Daenerys stood, what she wanted, and whether the North still had time to choose peace. But peace was growing thin. The War of Five Kings had... The Raven arrived in the early hours of the morning, black wings slicing through the gray skies above Winterfell. Eddard Stark stood in the Godswood, beneath the heart tree, when Maester Luwin found him. The parchment bore the royal seal, the weight of the crown pressed into wax like a silent threat. King Robert Baratheon had offered Ned the position of Hand of the King. But this time, Ned Stark did not accept. He remembered the look in Catelyn's eyes when she had pleaded with him to stay. He thought of the North wild, proud, cold, and how it needed its lord, especially with the whispers of unrest in the south. And most of all, he thought of Jon Arryn's mysterious death, which Robert had skirted around. Something about it stank. He trusted Robert, but he didn't trust the court, nor the shadows that crept behind thrones. When the king arrived in Winterfell, grand and loud as ever, Ned gave him the answer face to face. "I am honored, your grace, but my place is here. In the north, I cannot leave Winterfell." Robert's face fell, heavy with disappointment and old memories. "7 hells, Ned. You're the only man I trust." But even as he said it, Robert could see in Ned's eyes that his decision was final. So the king left, riding south with his retinue, Cersei fuming silently behind him, Shaim smirking as if he'd won some unseen game. Little did anyone know how deeply that refusal would twist the fate of Westeros. In King's Landing, Robert was forced to choose another hand, an ambitious one, eager to please and ready to manipulate. Petyr Baelish, charming and dangerous, suggested Lord Renly or perhaps Lord Tyrell. But it was Tywin Lannister who finally took the seat, nudged forward by Cersei, who whispered that if Robert would not have her brother Jaime, then let her father sit behind the throne instead. Thus, Tywin Lannister became the hand of the king, cloaked in gold and cunning. King Robert, already weary of ruling, drank more, hunted more, and left more of the kingdom's affairs in Tywin's calculating hands. The crown debts began to vanish, but the cost was silence, fear, and whispered executions in the black cells. Varys watched it all, his little birds fluttering. Back in Winterfell, Ned Stark remained a father and a lord, not a politician. His days were filled with training Bran, riding with Robb, and overseeing justice in the north. But news still reached him. Jon Arryn's death was followed by quiet disappearances in the capital. Catelyn received a letter from her sister Lysa, warning that the Lannisters had murdered her husband. Ned rode to the Eyrie, not King's Landing. He went quietly, bringing only a few guards. Lysa was paranoid, her halls filled with suspicion and fear. Yet what she told him chilled his blood. Jon Arryn had discovered the truth about Cersei's children, and that secret had killed him. "The lion cannot suffer threats," she whispered, her hands clutching at her son, Robin. He saw their golden hair. He knew they weren't Robert's. Ned returned to Winterfell with a storm brewing in his heart. But without being in King's Landing, he had no proof, no authority, and no allies. He wrote to Stannis Baratheon, carefully, indirectly, suggesting that he may have reason to look closer at the royal line. But Tywin Lannister was not blind. He intercepted a raven, one that never reached Dragonstone. He began to see the chessboard shifting. Stannis soon found himself watched, isolated, his household infiltrated. He left for Dragonstone in silence, preparing for something greater. Ned Stark, meanwhile, remained untouched for now. But trouble brewed elsewhere. Daenerys Targaryen married Khal Drogo, and Viserys plotted. Robert still placed a bounty on her head, and this time, with Tywin's approval, assassins were truly sent. The attempt failed, but only just. Drogo promised vengeance. Westeros stood on a precipice. The north remained strong under Ned, with Robb growing into a commander, and Jon Snow rising in the Night's Watch. The wall grew restless, wildlings stirring, white shadows whispered beyond the trees. And still, Ned's honor held firm, but the storm had only begun. Word of Khal Drogo's fury spread across the narrow sea like wildfire. When the attempt on Daenerys Targaryen's life failed, the Khal swore before all his blood riders that he would cross the poison water and tear down the Iron Throne. This was no longer idle Targaryen fantasy. It was war. Across the free cities, ships were commissioned. The Dothraki began to move in ways no one had ever seen before. For the first time in centuries, Westeros had roused something ancient and unstoppable. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister treated the news with cold detachment. "Let them come," he said to the small council. "We will burn every horse they bring and salt the ground behind them." But even he knew that a Dothraki invasion, with dragons rumored to be reborn, was no simple threat. Robert, once a mighty warrior, now laughed it off between gulps of wine. "The Dothraki don't sail. Let the little princess scream across the sea. I'll have another hunt." But Robert's drunken confidence masked growing unease. The common people whispered of the dragon's return. Priests in the streets cried of omens, blood in the sky, fires that wouldn't die out, and ravens flying backward. The kingdom was restless. The king distracted. The hand calculating doubt far in the north. Ned Stark remained a quiet force. His refusal to go south had kept his head on his shoulders and his family whole. Robb was growing strong, learning not just the sword, but also the rule of law. Arya still climbed castle walls, but she now listened when her father spoke of strength and justice. Bran healed slowly after a fall. He had survived it this time, with no one to push him from a tower. Jaime Lannister had never visited Winterfell, but not all was calm. News of the Targaryen threat reached Winterfell too. Ned knew what Robert's wrath could mean. He remembered the sack of King's Landing, the bodies of Rhaegar's children. He knew Robert would try again. This time he feared Robert wouldn't miss, and so Ned did something he never imagined. He sent a raven to Daenerys Targaryen. He wrote not as an enemy, but as a father and a man of the realm. He warned her of assassins, of the Lannisters, and of the pain that war would bring. He did not pledge allegiance, nor did he threaten. He asked only for time to understand her purpose, to know if she came as a queen, or as a destroyer. The letter arrived months later, after Drogo had fallen ill, and Daenerys had begun to understand her true strength. Her dragons had hatched. Her world had changed. And so she read Ned Stark's letter not as a threat, but as an invitation. Meanwhile, chaos grew in the capital. Tywin's grip tightened. Varys and Littlefinger maneuvered behind the curtains, but with Ned Stark out of their reach, their games were less predictable. The old power balances had shifted. Tywin, now in command of the gold cloaks and royal coin, began quietly removing threats. Lords loyal to the Baratheons were undermined. Lannister gold bought loyalty where words failed. But the true blow came when King Robert Baratheon was gored by a boar on a drunken hunt. This time, there was no Ned Stark to write the final will, no protector of the realm to guide the king's dying hand. Tywin moved swiftly, naming Joffrey king before Robert's body was even cold. Cersei crowned her son in the Great Sept, and those who questioned the boy's blood were silenced or vanished. Stannis Baratheon, having received no aid from Ned Stark, declared himself the rightful king, but his army was small, and his allies few. Renly fled south, plotting with House Tyrell. The kingdom cracked, fault lines running between every major house dot in Winterfell. Ned received the news with a heavy heart. He had refused the crown's call to avoid war, but now the war had come anyway. Robb stood beside him in the great hall, his voice steady. "Will you march, father?" Ned's answer came not with words, but with action. He sent out ravens to the Vale, to the Riverlands, even to Stannis. He would not kneel to Joffrey, not to a bastard in a crown of lies. But he would not raise his banners in haste either. The North would watch and wait, and then another raven arrived from Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon had one question. "Did you know the truth of Joffrey's blood?" Ned stared at the parchment long into the night, snow falling outside the tower. The war for the throne had begun.